Welcome to Facing the Moment, brought to you by the Foundation for Self-Leadership. In these episodes, we will address various crises and focus on how to navigate them with abundant fortitude and a bit of hope. As we discuss relevant observations together, we will identify meaningful actions that will generate valuable insights. You can download all episodes on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube.
I thank my listeners for joining us today for this next episode. The focus today is going to be on the crisis in our schools, in particular schools within the U.S. Schools have always been places of learning, growth, and possibility. Today, however, perhaps more than in recent memory, they're also places of stress and strain. Here's what I see that concerns me and many of us. Educators and administrators may be exhausted, carrying heavier workloads, navigating uncertainty, dealing with heightened external constraints, and trying to show up for students while running on empty. Parents are worried in new ways about safety, stability, and how the world is weighing on their children. And students themselves are trying to find their footing in environments that often feel tense, distracting, or overwhelming. Yet beneath the noise and pressure, something else is happening. People in schools, teachers, leaders, families, children, and teenagers are looking for steadier ground. They're searching for ways to meet this moment with more determination and clarity, with more presence and more heart. In this episode, we explore what's happening in our schools, why it's taking such a toll, and how we can begin to shift the inner climate of our classrooms and communities. That's what today's conversation is about. And to help me set the stage and share insights with our listeners, I'm privileged, highly privileged, to be joined by Joanna Curry-Sartori, LMFT. Joanna, welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much, Toufic. It is a delight and honor to be here with you right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Joanna is a published author of a new book entitled The Self-Led Educator. She is a sought-after workshop designer, presenter, and speaker. She's a caring therapist, and she's a former executive of a Mindful Center and the current founder of the growing Self-Leadership Collaborative, through which she developed the PAUSE program that many communities within the U.S. and abroad are finding of value. Joanna was the recipient of the Foundation for Self-Leadership's grants, 2 of them actually, to help bring the IFS lens to schools. We're honored to have had a small part along her journey and contributed to the development of her curricula and publication of her book. Joanna has worked extensively with many schools, working with them to help them deal with the challenges and navigate those challenges with greater resilience and wisdom. I'm deeply grateful you've joined me, Joanna. What else might you like to add about you that might be relevant to this conversation?
Thank you, Toufic. Thank you for that warm welcome. So I want to add that I'm a parent. I have a son who's 16 years old. And so that journey of my own being a parent has always deeply informed this work. And I feel that those of us that are focused on caring for the well-being of our young people wake up each morning with this inevitable question of how we can be of service and how we can make the world a better place. So that really connects me to my heart each day and informs my work. And then that dovetails really beautifully in that I'm trained as a marriage and family therapist. So I'm trained to really look at the health of the whole system, the whole family, how we're all relating and connecting. And what's significant to that in me is there's something exponential that happens when we're working together to be connected into our well-being, to how we can uplift each other. Sometimes we'll do something for each other we might not do for ourselves. And so I'm really passionate about bringing this collective consciousness for well-being, not only to families, but to schools, to communities, to organizations, and unlocking this true potential we hold to collaborate and nurture the greater good. So that bubbled up when you asked, what else do you want to add? I really wanted to put that into the soup for today.
Yes, well, very important elements of that soup, right? And it's a
Yeah.
soup, so all these things get integrated and make you who you are at the end of the day. So
Yeah.
for starters, before we talk solutions or try to rescue hope, I would like to honor the reality that people are facing on the ground. It's a difficult reality. There are mounting pressures on school educators and paraprofessionals, administrators and elected boards, parents and students. What do you see? What have you learned from your first-hand interactions that is actually happening in our schools?
I think often we take time to list the external factors, the political factors, the academic concerns, the assessments, and so forth. And in addition to that, it's not just those external factors or what's happening to individuals. What I see is, it gets back to what I was saying in my introduction, really looking at what's happening to the fabric of community and connection. And there are so many concerning signs of disconnection. So in a local and global climate that where we're encountering so much fear and adversity and polarization and conflict and violence, a lot of people are experiencing more and more fear. And in that fear, more and more tendency to say, how can I and my people and my family and the people like me be safe? And then there's more and more tendency to point and blame and disconnect and make assumptions and judge. And it creates this severing and rift in the fabric of community. And community is where learning happens. It's in the fabric and the holding of that community that we encircle our children with the safety that they can land each morning, knowing they're welcomed and loved and belong, that their system then can relax to be open and curious to learn. So this factor of disconnection, I think, needs to be directly looked at, acknowledged, and addressed, and we have the power and tools to do that.
Very well said. Yes, connection. We have to keep that in mind, connection and community. So what are you hearing from school educators and others about these pressures or external pressures as you listed them? How are they affecting their inner thoughts, their sense of purpose, and perhaps even their externally facing energy?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's this dance, right? There's all, like, if we run a movie camera in a school or in our lives, we see us in action and we see external things that are happening. And as we're acknowledging, there are many, many very real external stressors and realities that have to be acknowledged. And as we show up day by day to encounter those stressors, to face the moment and those realities, inevitably there's an impact on us internally. And so one of the things, in order to appreciate what's happening internally and to welcome that into a space of dialogue, very often when my team and I go into the schools, whether we're having a small meeting with the leadership or we're meeting with the staff, we'll actually invite them to take a moment and notice what is happening internally and to give voice to that, to speak for some of the different parts of us that are there. And it's really striking to me because very often the first layer of what I hear reported is, of course, their dedication, how hard they're working, not wanting to give up, believing in the profession, caring very deeply, wanting to do a good job. And then right under that, like the more we start to name these different factors, there's also recognition of feeling exhausted, feeling inadequate, parts of them that feel very sad, or discouraged, disheartened, sometimes powerless. And you sort of hear how it starts to settle in. And when we live with that feeling of discouragement, especially when it's a profession we chose because we care and we love what we do. It's important. We feel that discouraged and it's not held in community. We don't make meaning of it. We don't find our way back to our power. Then the impact is either we're living in sort of a disconnected, ragged state, or many people are leaving the profession at a alarming rate. So there's a profound impact that's very concerning.
Yeah, yeah. I like to kind of maybe even go deeper, looking at those effects of what goes on outside of us on maybe three groups that I mentioned earlier in the intro. Let's start with educators. You know, many educators are expressing their fears, frustration, and overwhelm, kind of like you mentioned, is imposing paperwork, more intrusive mandates, fewer resources, not to mention they have lives outside schools that could be demanding. I mean, we all know that, right? Yeah. And I fully understand that there are so many different types of schools, and the situation in the US may not parallel that in other countries. I want to make sure we acknowledge that. Yet, from your vantage point, what do you think is driving this overwhelm? Could you pinpoint a couple external conditions, societal developments that might be affecting what's going on among educators these days?
That's a great question. One piece I want to acknowledge is that as far as your acknowledgement that it's different in different contexts and cultures and around the world, when we're running our online cohorts, we often have participants from 15 different countries.
Wow.
From the United States, from across Europe, the Middle East. We've had folks from Asia, Australia, New Zealand, and it's been quite striking to both welcome and acknowledge the differences, but to hear the amount of commonality around the world with what we're facing. So referencing what we've already discussed, when we're in a greater cultural climate where there's more and more political, cultural, religious divide, that just creates kind of a climate where people are more fear-based and more isolated and more separate. And that inevitably makes its way into the school culture and environment. There's more and more demand for everybody to be a winner and everybody to get the highest scores and everybody to pass very narrowly defined assessments and forms of testing that say this is what is intelligence or this is what a proper skill set is, and not really recognizing what we need to do to diversify education and welcome all forms of intelligence. I think we see the impact of technology, very profound and intense. And then even if you if you could take any one of these branches, but with technology, parents somehow are more distracted, more busy, more under pressure, maybe then less available to their students. Students aren't necessarily getting the time from their parents or their teachers or adults around them to slow down, be seen, be heard. So then they have unmet needs. It might turn into different kinds of more extreme emotional expressions, which then becomes an added stressor to the adults. And there we are caught in this very complicated web and cycle. A lot of it arising out of various forms of coming from a place of fear and self-protection. And I highlight that because the more that we can kind of recognize this natural human knee-jerk reaction to go into protection, it also becomes the key to start unlocking the pattern and remembering we have another capacity. We don't have to live and operate that way with each other.
Fear and anger, two very difficult emotions to navigate and learn from. So let's talk about the effects on parents. And you're a parent of a 16-year-old. I guess I couldn't believe the time. I must have known you for 7 years now, because I remember it was probably around 9 at the time.
Yeah.
So parents are anxious too about the safety of their children, clearly, about their well-being, about politics and religion interfering with school curricula, as we see it in many states these days. And I have to note that some parents may be pleased with these outcomes. Hence, there is anxiety rising, around polarization with other parents. I'm curious, from what you've experienced, how is this climate affecting the relationship between educators and parents, and perhaps even among parents?
Mm. Well, so before we even specifically focus on parents, if we just like, if you think about a moment when we feel like we've been blamed or singled out as separate or told we're not good enough, or if we think other people might be dangerous to us, we go into that self-protective mode, right? We're like, okay, how am I going to stay safe? When we go into that more alarmed or stressed state, we are more likely to point fingers, make assumptions, jump to conclusions, be overly reactive or emotional. And if we're honest with ourselves, we all can recognize that. Now, when we're parents and we're responsible for the safety and well-being of our dear little cubs, we go into mama bear, papa bear mode. And it's almost like what I see in myself and other parents is very often that mode almost becomes magnified because it's the safety and well-being of our own child. Are they going to be okay? Are they going to be safe, included, valued, able to succeed, able to be happy? And the minute we detect that maybe our sweet dear heart isn't safe and okay, it's a very strong impulse and instinct, which has very understandable purpose and origins, that rises up. The more we're in a heightened culture or climate of fear, though, and the more we're seeing signals of, oh no, what if, and are they okay? Then a community of people, we tend to then send each other signals. There's more reaction to each other. There's more blaming of leadership in schools and assuming it's not being done well. And rather than slowing down for a minute and saying, let me get curious, why did that teacher or leader make that decision? Or where's that other person or parent coming from? Or what if they have a positive intent as well? Or that other kid that apparently was so bad to my child on the playground, what might be going on for that child and what's happening in their home at this intense time? So we often have that automatic response. Again, it's understandable, but sadly, it perpetuates the very pattern that we're troubled by. And so the more we can become conscious of this knee-jerk reaction, we start to have some space and choice to be a part of making a difference in the climate and culture of our families and schools.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll be talking a lot more about that piece of it, how we can respond to what's going on. And like you said, it's very hard to talk about one group independently of the other because they all,
we're all interconnected.
What happens to one effect, exactly, they're all interconnected. But I'd like to at least honor the third group, which I think is very important to all of us, students, right? Yeah. They're ultimately, the focus of education. And they are the next generation of citizens, parents, educators, and professionals and public leaders, more practically speaking, right?
Yes.
They're probably fending off the toughest pressures, academic, emotional, social. You mentioned fear. There's probably anger. There's probably bullying in the schools. There's all sorts of issues that the students are dealing with in a given moment. And let's not forget the effects of the pandemic that are still lingering when it comes to learning in particular. How would you describe these dynamics from a student point of view, and how do you think they're impacting?
Well, it's, from the beginning when I was working in schools, one of the things that really struck me was very caring and well-meaning teachers, school counselors, parents would bring young people to me and say, they're really struggling with depression, anxiety, this concern. Can you help them? And in a way, there was sometimes an embedded message like, can I leave them with you once a week for an hour and would you please fix them? And as children we're each our unique person. We have our own physiology and chemistry and personality and outlook, yes. And so much of how a young person is presenting is the sum total of their relationships with everyone around them, and especially the adults. So we've been talking about the adults. So then what I would invite us to visualize is that through the pandemic and through our recent time, with everything going on in the world, locally and globally, our young people are traveling through this time side by side with us. So conscious or not, explicit or implicit, they're witnessing, how do we respond when we open the news? How do we handle it when somebody says something unkind to us? How do we deal with feeling we're overwhelmed with too much to do? How do we navigate when we have a difference of opinion with somebody? And these young people are side by side with us. Their body, mind, heart is there, side by side, traveling along and encoding and partnering with us or receiving us as models and how to see life, how to respond to stressors. And very often we even explicitly coach them, like, here's how I'm thinking about it. Here's what I'm doing. Here's my thought about that person. Here's what's bad to do and good to do and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So our young people are learning how to see and make meaning out of life with us. So how have young people responded to this time? How have young people encoded and responded to any time, whether there was war or trauma or opportunity? They're learning to respond based on how we're responding.
Mm.
And so there are adults during this time who've been doing a phenomenal job. So yes, there's external stressors, but that doesn't have to turn into trauma in our system. If the young people experience we're there with them, and if we can slow down and look at it and think of other people's perspectives and make sense about it, and then say, okay, we're together in this, we have capacity, how do we want to respond? Then that can happen. And to your point about the stressors and all the signs and signals of the distress that many young people are experiencing, many young people do not have adults by their side, at least often enough, to help them make meaning, feel their capacity and power, and learn their ability to respond. So then, yes, we're seeing signs and signals in young people, but I always want to context it because it's not going to serve us to just jump to solutions to try and fix the young people, to diagnose them, to run in with another curriculum and initiative, and then teach them skills if we don't get it ourselves and embody it as the adults that are with them all day. So
Well,
it really starts with us.
Amen. And we're going to talk about the us piece and what we,
Oh, yes. We're
parents
going
and
to get into the
educators.
us.
Yes. But what you're sharing actually brought to mind a shouldn't say old book, but a book that you must have read as a family therapist called The Family Crucible. I don't remember the name of the authors, but it was basically suggesting that kids reflect what goes on with the family. You know, if there's a broken bond in the family, if the atmosphere in the family household is difficult, they're gonna reflect that. They're gonna act out based on that. And even if they don't act out, they're gonna be processing life around them based on that experience. And I can extrapolate that to the school community, because in the school they're reflecting their teachers' attitudes and behaviors, and they might even reflect some of their classmates' behavior, especially if they idolize one or two of their classmates. So it's a very complex dynamic. Like we said, it's all interconnected. And I fully agree with you that the adults have to set the stage model, simulate how we should actually, respond to crises, respond to the moment as a way to educate our kids for how to do it. So let's move to that space where we might start thinking of solutions, because many of us in the self-awareness space are of the perspective that establishing healthier organizations, such as schools in this case, starts with the inner lives of members of these communities, such as educators in this case, teachers, paraprofessionals, administrators, and board members. Might you elaborate on this notion, given your expanded work and experience with educators? How the self-awareness, how this understanding of inner lives can manifest itself in our behaviors and how we show up.
Definitely. So I again, at one point we were speaking earlier, and I was speaking about kind of that fabric of community that holds our young people, and that they're living in that soup, in that container, and all the everyday interactions informs how they make meaning of themselves in life, right? And I think we know, many of us in the field of education, how critical that is. So for many years, there's been a conversation around culture and climate. And then the question becomes, well, it's also kind of big and broad and subtle. Like, how do you develop culture and climate that can benefit young people? How do you break that down, right? So building on what we've been discussing, the way I've been thinking a lot about culture is that culture is the sum total of our all day, everyday interactions. And if you add those all together, what you get at the end of the day is the culture of a place. That when you walk in the door, you're like, I feel welcomed here and respected. I feel like I can be myself. I feel like I can be in relationship and connect and play and be curious, right? That's culture. Okay. So if it's dependent on all day, everyday relationships, based on what we've been saying, we need to look at all the relationships. So yes, it's important to look at the relationships between the teachers and the young people and how do we nurture that. And the thing that's fascinating is the more I've been out and about in the schools and working with educators, they'll say, kind of almost pull me aside and be like, Joanna, can I just mention something? The relationship with the students is less of the challenge for me, if I'm honest. They'll say, it's my colleagues and my administrator. And then sometimes these parents, these other adults can be so difficult and really triggering for me. And we don't often give a lot of focus to that. But the quality of those interactions does directly impact what our young people are seeing, witnessing, feeling, and the culture of a place. Okay, so we're acknowledging then well-being of all relationships matters. Well, how do you set up a good relationship? Very often we can go into workshops and they're like, well, use these sentence stems and do active listening. Well, for that to work, both people who are in that interaction have to show up with a degree of self-awareness and a willingness to take self-responsibility for their part in the interaction. So if we're going to come to where we have healthy interactions, and if that's our goal, we need to back up and start with ourselves as the instrument. And very often, in a very well-meaning way, we're so concerned about other people and they are okay, and am I pleasing them? Am I listening to them? What do they need? We don't realize how we're showing up. And we might show up with a well-meaning agenda or be overprotective or overcompensate for people or just get annoyed at some point and withdraw. Or we are thinking we're being encouraging, but the message that comes across is we're judging. We've got to back it up and come back and say, where am I coming from? What's driving in me for these relationships that make culture?
Yep.
So it's all levels of system that need attention.
Yes, and I certainly subscribe to that systemic thinking. And you, as a family therapist, I'm sure, are also a systems thinker. That's why I think parents are part of this as well, and how teachers interact with parents and how parents interact with other parents within that space. And of course, these interactions aren't in vacuum, right? So what informs, influences, drives this culture is the invisible set of rules and policies and histories and grievances and all sorts of stuff that have happened, and the norms that have been established by over time by this group or that group. All that influences these interactions. So when one wants to go deep into organizational understanding, all that has to be parsed out. So, but that aside, because we cannot fix it all, we're just focusing on how our self-awareness can affect managing behaviors. And I think there is this piece where people talk about being grounded, right? They say managing behavior, it's not just about managing behaviors, it's about figuring out how to be grounded, which then will influence that behavior. And I know your organization and our foundation carry that self-leadership phrase in our names. So I would love for you, without using psychological jargon, if you can, explain this distinction between the behavior and the state of being grounded.
Okay. So we look often, our concern is the young people. We look at their behaviors. Perhaps we see behaviors that concern us. Maybe they're withdrawn. Maybe they get reactive and angry. Maybe they're disengaged. Maybe they refuse to come to school. Maybe they can't manage their emotions and they go from 0 to 100. So we see a behavior on the outside that concerns us.
And I'd like to add that this is not students, also adults. But exactly what you said applies to many adults as well.
Absolutely.
I want our listeners to notice that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Sometimes we start by talking about young people because we care so dearly for them. We can see it in them and then slowly back and we go, oh, time out. That's me too, right?
Yes, exactly.
So we can, one of the ways to think about behavior is kind of like the tip of the iceberg. So very often we spend all this time trying to manage behaviors and we put in place behavioral education plans and modification plans and interventions and accommodations, which sometimes work. And then sometimes they don't. And we're so bewildered. Why does this behavior persist? Where is it coming from? Why do they keep doing this? Right? So let me just take a sidestep for a moment just to share a little bit of what I see underneath in that iceberg. Coming back to, so we have our young people, or us when we were growing up, we're learning our behaviors from our all day, everyday interactions side by side with adults. When a stressor or difficulty comes up, how do I respond? And as I mentioned earlier, we're not only practicing a behavior side by side with adults, our whole being is there. Our heart is there, our mind is there, our thoughts, our words, and we kind of encode a pattern of response. And it becomes, we're just trying to get our needs met. We're in face of a stressor. How do I not fall apart, lose control, turn out to be stupid and inadequate? How do I survive here? How do I stay included in the clan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we build our best strategy to date, and it turns out that's this like bundled response of not just behavior, but thoughts and feelings. And so then I think of it like, even by the time our kiddos get to kindergarten and they show up there on that sweet little circle and that well-meaning teacher's organized the first day of class and feels like everything's welcoming. And there's this little kiddo who the teacher turns around and maybe the kid feels, oh, that teacher's unavailable. And then they have an outburst. And the teacher thinks, what did I do wrong? What happened? That was a practiced response, a part of them that's their best strategy so far. So if we just judge it at face value and control it and think, oh, I'm a failure as a teacher, or that kid's a problem, or I can't do this, we're just going to have a clash of reactions. When we see a behavior, we have to remember that this is a part that's been there for a long time already, even in a 5-year-old, and it's well-intentioned. It's their best strategy to date.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to your question, what's the difference between managing that kind of response and behavior versus staying grounded? If we can see that response as a part of that child with a positive intent, number one, we realize it may not be from this time and place. It may or may not have to do with me. But what does that child need? They need my curiosity and compassion. So again, can I, as the adult, first check in with myself, take a breath, not take this personally, and stay present with this child with some compassion? That's self-leadership. Instead of self-protection, oh no, am I okay as a teacher? It's self-leadership. I'm going to get to my best self in my center and show up to care. And then that child can grow and learn.
Beautiful, beautiful. So let's take this to the natural extension of it. Let's paint this ideal picture.
Okay.
So describe to us how school educators or school leaders can best show up or come across in their classrooms. You mentioned curiosity and compassion. But they're interacting with the students in the classrooms, with other students and teachers in the school hallways, with parents during after school meetings or whatever you call these things. My kids are too old now for me to remember the conferences with the teachers, you know, and some of them fight during PTA meetings, right? Or even outside schools during sports events or music events or what have you. They're wrestling with a highly stressful moment without sometimes knowing it, right? Their body knows it. And they do so from a place of steadiness. Those teachers you talked about that have figured out how to tap into that gift that they have or capacity that they have and show compassion and curiosity. They tap into that place of steadiness, positive outlook, caring, trust in their own resourcefulness, and they keep things in perspective. You know, I painted a few brushes, but give us the full picture. What does that ideal place look like that we're striving toward?
Well, you can imagine, Toufic, I love this question. I've had such a joy, and it's been such a privilege to watch this in action in classrooms and in whole schools. So what does it look like? The first thing is that, we often go to a school and we'll offer an introductory workshop to a whole staff, really offered as an introduction to just start to think about what does it look like when they are their best selves? And when is that already happening? Because at some level, this one principal once said to me, "Oh, Joanna, this is what I do intuitively on my best day." And I was like, yeah, exactly. So we offer that. We also offer an exploration of what is the self-protective automatic reactions we have. What are the different parts of me that might come up as an educator? So we offer that out as an invitation and exploration. Inevitably, there's a number of teachers who decide they're curious to go deeper. So what I've watched is there's teachers who say, I want to learn this model. I want to learn this approach. I want to see, where am I coming from? I want to, for my own sake, to start caring for myself, to not jump over myself. I want to because I want to appreciate how I'm impacting students. And maybe I haven't been conscious really of where I'm coming from because I've been so focused on them. So I've watched these teachers who take on this journey to get to know themselves and explore where they're coming from. And then it translates into the classroom. And even when I've said to them, I really invite you to take time first, just try it on for yourself. They'll come back and almost apologize. Joanna, I'm so sorry. I couldn't help it. I had to try something with my students. And I'm like, that's fantastic. You're warmly welcome, right? So then what does it look like? It's that phrase, the all day, everyday interaction. So it's not in the big dramatic moments or a presentation or the lesson or because a severe thing happened. It's because there's the little moments where one kid's running around and has the scissors open and wasn't paying attention. And how does the teacher help them to pause and just notice what's safe? Or the teacher attunes to a moment when an emotion crosses a child's face and it's a new lesson and the kid clearly is feeling a little lost but embarrassed. Or the teacher themselves is just tired that day and kind of snappy and grumpy, and then they take responsibility for that, right? So before it's anything explicitly taught or, quote, done with students, it's a teacher showing up with self-awareness, self-compassion, and then a greater capacity to also be aware of how are their students doing in that moment? Where are they coming from? And what do they need right now? And then the next level of it is, yes, they start to bring in tools and they bring in first proactive little micro practices, a check-in at the door, a pause moment in their circle to just let students take a moment. How are you doing today? And where are you coming from? And then to hear from each other. And the teachers sprinkle in little different practices related to our model to build consciousness, awareness, connection capacity. And this one teacher, Amy, she's an art teacher in a middle school, and every student who comes through her classroom receives these practices. And she only has the students in a rotation for 40 minutes. And people say, Amy, you're an art teacher. You only have a tiny amount. How could you possibly have time for these well-being programs? And she says, I don't have time not to do this. When we take time to land and pause and connect, we're with each other in community. My students are present. They're engaged. They're ready for learning. Without this, we lose so much time.
Yeah.
And then finally, what this means is that when those more serious situations happen, there's a tragedy in the community, an incident on the playground, a rupture between students, they have the tools and capacity to sit down and very skillfully, mindfully, purposefully listen, check in, connect, and find out what the community needs for repair and moving forward.
That's
It's
beautiful.
beautiful to, yes, it's beautiful to speak. And even now, I mean, I've told that story and right now the hair is standing up on my arm because it's a dream come true and yet it's real. It's not just a dream. It's happening.
No, I feel it with you actually. And I know people think, oh, you guys are dreamers. But you said it. Some teachers, maybe most teachers, have been in that state of mind and in that state of showing up, maybe for short moments. But it's all about micro moments, like you said beautifully, right? And it's basically being able to show up the best way we can, our best selves, as people say. And it's just a way to remind them that they have that capacity and be able to reach to it in a moment of need. And what a great model that shows to students who want to be heard, who want to be seen, who get nervous about being judged or embarrassed. And the same thing for the adults. So it seems like we all have that capacity from what you're sharing.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear more about this pause program that you talked about. You mentioned pause a couple times already. So I know it's a verb and it's an action verb, but it's also an acronym for your program that reminds people what the steps are. So might you just tell us a bit more about it for listeners who never heard of it? What is it in essence?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it in essence, in a way, like I often start by saying, so I think we all can relate to those moments where we're like, oh shoot, if I had only paused, that would have really helped, right? Or we say, you know what, I think I'm just going to take a pause before I say anything. And from the intuitive level, what is it that happens when we pause? And what I found as I've done my presentations and explored it myself and worked with educators is there's a couple of levels of what happens there. One is we just take a breath and step back, and often our body can settle. We notice what's happening inside of us so we can recognize even just a little more, where am I coming from? If other people are involved, we take a moment, cast our attention over to them and go, okay, right, there's other people here that are having an experience too. And also, it tends to kind of just give us perspective. It shifts the action we take. So, pause as an acronym encapsulates that in a series of steps, a shared process, a shared language that offers a guiding framework. It is not meant to be jargon, it is not meant to be rigid, it's meant to be very fluid. Very often, my father raised me taking me to the jazz clubs in New York City. And I really learned a lot about the miracle of jazz, and that all these musicians would practice a skill set and a language so that they could come together with any different people at any time and make music. And with pause, I sort of see an invitation for us to learn a set of scales, a shared song, sort of a standard piece of music, but so that when we come together in the constant improvisation of life, we can be present and connected and attuned and responsive together. So that's kind of the sense behind it is, can I be connected to myself, connected to you, connected to the moment, so we respond from self-leadership. Anytime you're in interaction, you have to make a decision, take action, pause can inform the way you respond.
Well, and thank you for this metaphor or this analogy with jazz, because one can think about that pause program as a skill, as a practice, let's say, that I can run through and adapt it to any setting, with any interaction, whatever the key of that piece of music is, I can adjust to it, right?
Yes, exactly.
Would you be interested in sharing with us step by step this mental construct and how a person can use it?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. So, before I start talking you through the steps, I'm going to invite you, even, and everyone who's listening, to just for a moment think of a recent interaction that maybe didn't go quite optimally. And I don't mean like a big blow up. I mean like on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a 2 or a 3, but just one of those moments where buttons were pushed, a little activation, a little frustration, or that feeling of like, wait, what just happened there? So bring one of those to mind and let me talk you through these steps. And you can use pause right now as a way to debrief what happened there. So first, as you call the situation to mind and see it on your like the screen of your mind and who was there and what was happening, imagine if you can pause and just step back and just sort of witness it. And the first step of pausing is we just sort of notice what's happening around us. And another aspect, which we've been referring to in this conversation, is what's happening inside of us. So just a first inner glance, if you could see yourself in that moment, what was your state? Were you in a state of stress and self-protection? Were you in a state of calm and poise and self-leadership? And my guess is, if this situation is coming to mind, that probably there was some activation. which invites us to go to the A of pause, which is to be aware of myself. Where am I coming from in this situation? And very often we skip over this. So sink in a little deeper, thinking of that moment, and think, where was I coming from in that situation? What did I need? What was my perspective? What different parts of me were coming up? And sometimes we can have multiple responses coming up, multiple parts of us that are rising up to try and help us in that moment. And then, and I'm going, just taking you right through it, that you could pause at any of these moments to spend more time. But once we take time to be aware of ourselves, often there's just sort of some self-awareness, some self-understanding, like, yeah, I can see where I was coming from. Maybe I didn't get the impact I wanted, but I get my intent, right? Something inside can soften and settle a little bit. And that makes space in our heart to now go to the U of pause, which is understanding. And to say to ourselves, okay, let me see if I can now get the other people or person. Where might they have been coming from? I get right now they're not in the room with us, but we can cast our attention over there with a touch of curiosity and compassion and say, wonder where they were coming from. And what parts of them do I see right now? And quite possibly they're different than they were in any number of different, like something was going on for them too. And what was their perspective and their need? How might I have been understanding to them? And then with understanding of self and other, connection to self and other, we can now connect more to the moment. That takes us to the S, which is to search for solutions. Now, you might notice this is a ways down in the model, because very often what happens is a situation happens, it pushes our buttons, and we go, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix it? Oh, what's the next action? And we jump to solutions. Now we're getting there after we've had time to reconnect to ourselves and expand perspective. So if we're searching for solutions, it's almost like now we're listening into the whole of the situation. What does the situation call for? What's needed here for everyone? Sometimes it's about casting back and repairing. Sometimes it's looking forward and having the perspective to say, what's going to benefit all here? Not just now and in this generation at this time, but maybe even for generations to come. And that's a place of brainstorming, opening to possibility. There isn't one or two right answers, but listening in and exploring. So we finally can move to experiment and say, well, we know life is about, we have to keep taking the next step forward. We need to take action. Let's see, based on this, if we can take an informed decision, a conscious action, what we think will be helpful and beneficial. And this experiment is really purposeful. This is like a scientist. We're going to try it out and see what happens. So in your situation, as you're thinking about it, maybe you can kind of think about what did happen, what could have happened, brainstorm how you might want to take a next step, and then choose one next action. Do you want to go and circle back with that person? Do you want to approach this next time in a different way? So that's the pause model. Pause, aware of myself, understand each other, search for solutions, experiment in action. It can be a debrief, but imagine this. You could be in the moment and in your mind following this. Or before a situation, you could use it to prepare. You could do it with two people. You can do it in a team. You can do it with a class. It allows us to be together practicing responding from self-leadership.
Very well said. And certainly based on your experience as a therapist, as a mindfulness teacher, and I see the logic in it. And I see that maybe in the first a few times might take 5 minutes to process, then or 7 minutes. And then over time, as we do this, it becomes almost like a micro thought, right?
Yes.
Boom, boom, boom.
Yes.
We go through it. We kind of collect
Yes.
all the energy and face it toward the person we're dealing with rather than be stuck in our own activation.
Yeah.
So we start with ourselves just quickly to collect, and then we put all that positive energy before us. And I know you've trained hundreds maybe of educators with this program, and you've done some assessment of it. I know the foundation funded a few. I wonder if you could briefly, just ever so briefly, because I'm looking at the clock, share with us what came out of this once those teachers have adopted this as a way of seeing things. And I have to add parenthetically that what I see as a nice thing about this program is that it's not going to have to squeeze anything out, because schools have done all sorts of investments in this program and that program, in their social emotional learning efforts. This is almost like my read of it, it could integrate with anything that already exists. It enhances, enriches, deepens, affirms, and it just gives it's a lens, it's a window.
Yes. Yes.
But give me a sense maybe of what you've observed once quite a few educators have adopted it, and maybe they've seen changes in their own interaction with students as a result as well, and in their students.
Yeah, I mean, part of what's striking me as you ask the question is the systemic impact, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the first level of impact is, oh my gosh, I didn't realize I needed this for myself. Joanna, my husband and I are getting along differently, and I'm responding to my kid different when they don't get out the door on time. And I was like, well, interesting. We were training you for school, but we just brought transformation to your family.
Yes.
And that feeling of self-compassion. So often they come back and say, I just relate to myself differently. And then they say, you know what? I think this was the model I've been looking for my entire career. Even people like toward the end of retirement have shared that with me. It transforms the quality of interactions with young people and with colleagues. So it just brings greater ease, peace, understanding, and collaborative capacity into everyday relationships. Things that used to be a place where a teacher would really get stumped or a whole class could get derailed, they just have a way to recenter, reconnect, and get the team and the class back on track. Less referrals to the office, less needing to kind of escalate it to a higher level of care, because this capacity, which I really believe we all have, the ability to listen and be present and connect, we just have to build the skill and remember we can do this.
Mm-hmm.
So it really empowers educators. And then, it translates systemically. So it's a way of interacting, right? So you can take this into the boardroom. You can take this into staff meetings. You can follow this process when change is happening. There's new leadership. There's a new initiative. A beloved staff member is leaving, right? There's a hard decision to make. And even when I think about some of our well-being programs, sometimes it comes to a place where you're like, well, that's what we needed a few years ago, but that doesn't match our needs now. What if you follow pause to say, okay, what's working and where are we stuck? Where are the parts of us individually and collectively that need attention? So pause becomes a very fluent and relevant model to nurture well-being as a systemic culture.
Yeah, I mean, I could see, you mentioned ripple effects into households. I can see this really affecting the school climate as a whole. In every interaction, we're now aware as a school of how these things kind of get blown out of proportion, and how we keep the lid on them and navigate them in the moment so that we don't have to escalate, right? Yeah. It's almost like de-escalate, resolve conflicts in ways that support both parties in that conflict, which is really what I'm hearing you say. I want to go back to you and your own experience seeing that happen. I mean, I'd love to hear from you about a moment that stands out for you. A teacher who found her footing, a teacher-teacher interaction that evolved as a result of that inner work, that pause, lens, an environment in a classroom that you heard about, which shifted and inspired students to learn better. What stands out for you? Share with us an anecdote or two, if you don't mind.
Well, so many beautiful stories come to mind. One was I was in a middle school with the teachers after school in the library, 100 of them packed in. We did a simple listening exercise to talk to a partner and just listen from that place of curiosity and compassion. Each person was just going to be listened to for 3 minutes. And I think the question was, how are you? We came back together and I was just debriefing. What was that like? And one teacher said, that was amazing. Nobody ever just listens to me. I listen to others, and I said, so what would happen in the school if you all had somebody who said, how are you once a day and listened to you for 3 minutes? And then I'm looking around, and some people had tears rolling down their face because it
Yeah,
was so
I love
profound.
this. I love this question. Sorry to interject, but I had to share it. My first
Yeah.
impression when I came to the US as a student is, people pass by and say, "How you doing?" And they keep going. It's like, wait a minute, I'm sick today. I have an issue, but they already passed. So the
Let's
language
listen.
also, "How you doing?" becomes like a hello, and there's no time
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
connect and really mean, "How are you?" I'm curious. I'm interested. Back to
Yeah.
you. Sorry for the interruption, but
No, but
you
it's
just
true.
brought
It's
that
like,
experience.
yeah. And what are the parts of us that are driving us to be so busy and so productive that we can't stop to listen for 3 minutes? And also, we ask, how are you, not how are you doing? One of our colleagues, Kath Serino, who's a former superintendent, loves to say to people, and it's something we hear around, but remember that we're human beings, we're not human doings. And so just holding this space for humanity, I've watched to just be so transformative. Like if we can have a space to be present, to listen, and like I was saying right at the beginning, when I named the different responses, we invite people to speak for their different parts, and they're allowed that humanity to have different sides of themselves. And it gives them a lot of permission to suddenly realize, like during the pandemic, they weren't the only one who was feeling overwhelmed and inadequate and anxious. But if they had shown up at work and said, I'm anxious, they would have felt embarrassed and not even said it. But if they could say, a part of me is feeling overwhelmed and a part of me is feeling anxious and a part of me is feeling really sad about this, all of a sudden they can hold each other. And we don't necessarily immediately fix the external realities and stressors, but we start by attending to our well-being and connection, and that empowers us to actually get more done. No?
And it allows us to be seen beyond our leading emotions, be they anger or fear or anxiety,
Exactly.
or that I'm
Yeah.
not all anxiety, I'm not all anger. These are
No, as
responses to
parts of us.
certain situations, and maybe over time I can figure out how to navigate them and use
Yeah.
them, toward my benefit rather than my detriment. So I want to switch and talk about action, a call to
Yeah.
action, if you wish, for these various groups we talked about: educators, parents, students. So let's help our listeners take action toward navigating whatever crisis they're facing, especially relating to the school community. So first, educators, what is one step they can take tomorrow morning to create more space within themselves in order to feel less tired, discouraged, or stretched thin?
Um,
What do you recommend
um,
educators do or think about first thing in the morning?
I invite us all to keep thinking about, how do I pause? So, what is one way for you to pause that works for you? One way for you to take a breath, step back, settle your body, get perspective, reconnect with what you love and value. Like, what's one way for each of us to do this, at least on a daily basis? If not sprinkling it like every time somebody said recently, every time I open the car door, I pause. So to build in that breathing space, because again, I think we intuitively know some possibilities for what we can do when we give ourselves that moment.
Yeah, I think that applies to parents. That also applies to students.
Yes.
So it's not just to educators, to everyone in that community and
Yeah.
beyond.
Yeah.
Because I guess by pausing, they're slowing down whatever's going on in their own minds and within their body, and they become present for
Yeah.
whatever's going to be happening in front of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great if every classroom lesson starts with a moment of silent self-reflection. Just take a moment and
Yeah.
settle down in your seat, and see if
Yeah.
you can focus on what's before you right now.
Yeah.
So I'd like to invite you to imagine, if there is infinite time, if there is infinite wisdom, by the leaders, by the educators, by the parents, what would that look like ultimately? What are the characteristics of a school that we're all striving to see happen, right? A school that becomes the best version of itself. Kind of sum up for us all the great things you talked about, all these positive behaviors, positive thoughts, the ability to think inward and collect ourselves to be present in the moment, listen and connect. what are these ripple effects? What would the school look like? Just describe it for our listeners, please.
Well, I'll tell you, Toufic, what comes to mind is the image of Clovis Global Academy in California,
Okay.
which is it's a bilingual school that has adopted an integrated pause from top to bottom. And so characteristics of this school, it starts with leadership who have the courage and humility to be self-reflective on a daily basis and to really walk the talk. Their leadership have embraced this as a personal professional practice. They have leaders from the middle who have curiosity and enthusiasm and creativity. And again, like I've got 3 of them in my current online cohort who decided to come back and take our 6-module workshop. They said they wanted to do it again.
That's great.
And they're letting themselves be a student. They're letting themselves have that sense of wonder and discovery. And in that bubbles up, in that space of creativity and possibility, bubbles up continuously new insight about how to meet their students as they are right now. And so I think another key component is that it's about forever being present and responsive to what's needed in the moment, both where people are struggling or feel stuck or separate or small, and to celebrate and recognize where there's thriving and connection and community, and that our shared humanity really has this power to be compassionate and to be with each other, and we can nurture it and practice it day by day, and then it gets contagious and it spreads. And to trust that we can do that.
Well, I don't need to imagine. It exists already, it sounds like, and it's possible. And every school could strive for that. And it seems that, the investment is minimal, right? It's taking the time to do that sort of thing because each of us has that capacity. It's like rescuing that ability from within us and putting it at work every day. I really appreciated very much this conversation and all the insights you've shared with us and this call to action, because what we heard today is that the situation in our schools is challenging, yet hopeful, even when the pressure is exerted from the outside. There's a promising path forward, and you shared with us some possibilities. It's hopeful when the adults engage with our schools, teachers, principals, and parents, and they have the tools and support to change the way they meet each moment. Thank you, Joanna, for showing us that to be fully present in any situation is really not a luxury. It's actually something we need to all be doing, and it's a skill. It's part of our learning and growing. And that skill can be taught, practiced, and shared. And I'm really struck by how much the heart of education depends on the heart and mind of the adults in the room. Something we cannot lose track of. It's not the policies in Washington or our capital cities or our state, departments of education. It's really in the adults. They have still some control over how they show up in the classroom, in the teachers' meetings, in the conference with parents, in board meetings, and so on. Adults who can pause, breathe, and return to a steadier place inside themselves seem to be able to operate at their best level, right? At that, the best they can be. Adults who know they do not have all the answers, but trust that they have inner resources to help them deal with whatever comes up. And I believe together, parents, teachers, and principals can work it out on relatively good days and perhaps not so good days. So if you're an educator, a parent, or a student listening today, I thank you. You help shape the climate of learning every day. And I hope that this conversation with Joanna leaves you with a little more faith in yourself, in others, in togetherness, a little more self-trust, and a few concrete steps for meeting the moments ahead. To learn more about Joanna's work, please visit the Self-Leadership Collaborative and her book, The Self-Led Educator. And to explore the Foundation's efforts to support such initiatives, please visit foundationifs.org. Thank you for joining us and for facing the moment with us. But before we say goodbye, I want to go back to Joanna. And I would love for you to share with me what gives you hope and resilience at this very moment. Joanne?
What gives me hope is the stories that circle back to me every day, the light in the eyes of a teacher who's discovered their power to connect to themselves and to influence and impact their community and their celebration. Yes, I actually can do this. This is why I came into this profession. I can uplift and benefit my students. That gives me enormous hope every single day.
Thank you. It was very insightful, very invigorating, and I appreciate everything you do. Blessings your way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Toufic.
And dear listeners, until next time.
Thanks for listening. Facing the Moment is an independent production of the Foundation for Self-Leadership, a nonprofit committed to bringing emotional, relational, and societal healing and well-being to a world in need. Learn more at foundationifs.org. You can download this and all other episodes on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Until the next episode, may we all keep facing the moment with grit and grace.